Hey, Sub here. Wanted to jump in and start the year off fresh, talking about this new article that came out by the Information and kind of what it reveals about Call of Duty's issues and why we have so many problems right now in Call of Duty from coming from the development side of things. And I think that I think this article really is, it has a lot of stuff that we that isn't really relevant, and a lot of stuff that's not news to us, but they do confirm some things. And there's one paragraph in particular that we're going to focus on, but it does share some information and confirm some things that I've been saying for quite a while now, that is without hesitation the root of most of the problems we're running into from the developers. So I want to get into this, and I want to go through it as briefly as I can. So here's the article: Microsoft's gaming business falls short despite Activision, by Aaron Holmes. I am going to point out that they do not mention, they don't name sources for some of this stuff, but it checks out against other information that we know. So I'm going to assume that they are correct. If they turn out not to be, then disregard this video. But they come in and they talk a lot about investors and how the game isn't going as well. Gaming and Microsoft gaming is not performing up to snuff, up to the way they want it. And so, and then they talk kind of about what the goal of gaming is for Microsoft, right? It was according to the article, it was kind of a go bigger or quit gaming entirely. And so they went big. They bought Activision, they bought Bethesda. And in this paragraph right here, this is the key. Microsoft also hoped the Activision deal would attract game developers to rent its Azure cloud servers, but Activision wasn't using Azure prior to the deal, and it still rents servers from Google Cloud and Amazon Web Services, while primarily relying on its own servers for development, according to someone with direct knowledge of the situation and another person briefed on it. So they are claiming two sources have confirmed this information. And this lines up with things we know. So in 2022, the CDL moved from Twitch to YouTube. And in that movement, in that announcement, they actually mentioned that it was part of a bigger deal with Google, which also is around the time that servers started to go downhill. Now, initially servers weren't terrible, but they started going downhill partway through that year. And when you look at the calendar of events, what you end up with is around the time the servers started to degrade, you had Microsoft step in and offer to purchase or attempt to purchase Activision. And so there's absolutely a correlation in my book between Microsoft's involvement and the services, and the service quality that we experience with the servers falling off. And so there's a variety of possible options for this. And when we get into that, it will be pure speculation on my part, and I will be sure to be clear about this, but I want to talk a little bit more about the overall situation. So Activision is on Microsoft servers for the game itself, I believe. Absolutely for the CDL. I think most of their games are carried on Microsoft servers. I think there are some aspects carried on Amazon Web. And it's entirely possible that old games, 2019 era, Warzone 1, may have been completely on Activision. Or I mean, not on Activision, on Amazon Web Services. And then they launched MW2 on Google services with the expectation of fully integrating into the Google Cloud services, which from a product standpoint is a little bit newer, but Amazon Web Services has been kind of a gold standard in hosted, in web hosting for years. One of the companies that I worked for actually left. So this is where, my experience comes in, because a company that I worked for actually left their own dedicated servers, specifically for this reason. and migrate. And so I was part of the push to migrate the entire company over to AWS, including our development space. And so when I hear that they have development space separate from their gaming, from their hosting space, and they've actually got multiple hosters, which I think is probably going to be legacy products hosted on AWS, and current products, so Warzone, Black Ops 6, MW2, MW3, are going to be hosted on Google because of the timing of when the CDL moved. So we are actually looking at, when we say we can't turn the servers back on, they literally cannot, because they don't pay for those servers. Those servers are not functional anymore. They are not part of the system, if that's true. And I don't doubt that it is, based on what I'm reading here and what I've observed over the last few years. So the problem is, now you have Google servers, you have Amazon servers, and you have their private development servers. And so with that situation, when I worked at this company, at a different company, and we had a similar problem, a similar situation, right? We ran into the same kind of problems that we run into right now in Warzone and Call of Duty, where they will release a patch, they'll release a fix, they'll fix something, the zombies fix with that 2-hit on that enemy, as a very recent example, where there's a mismatch between the development environment and the product environment, the live environment, the game that we play. And so when they develop in their own private development, environments, they're not actually able to test it fully and completely. In most cases, the discrepancies are low. All right. So so for 95% of what they do, it doesn't have a problem. But however, there's going to be differences in architecture and differences in the way the servers perform, because they're not the same. And what that means is that everything might work just great in development. However, when you push it, when it launches, all of a sudden you end up with these little discrepancies that break whatever it is you're launching, or they cause it to break something else. Sometimes, and we were more familiar with this in Warzone 1, they would bring a problem back that had been resolved prior to that. And so I think it's important to understand how this stuff works, right? When you look at, when you read statements like this, I think a lot of people blow through it and they don't focus on this. However, the fact that they have separate services for their development and for their hosting is going to be a big source of problems. And I think a lot of issues that we've had with updates, with patches, with new features not working is because of this. Like, this discrepancy means that the developers cannot build one-to-one. They have to, in a lot of ways, take their best guess of what it's going to do in the live service environment, like when they ship the product. And if they are not correct, right? If they miss something, or there's something going on that they're not ready for, or didn't anticipate, then we have this problem. And because you cannot test in the real environment until it goes live, they ship broken things. And so I think that is a problem with management at the highest levels, of not consolidating. And then you have, you obviously have Google, which is, and here's some speculation on my part. You have Google, which is a direct competitor to Microsoft, right? The whole point of this article is, or this paragraph says, Microsoft is hoping to draw people to use their Azure, whatever, use their hosting service. And the game is locked to Google. Well, Google's not going to advertise the quality of, is not going to provide the same quality that they might provide to somebody who is they're going to be their long-term partner, because I guarantee you, Microsoft is looking to move away from paying their competitor to host one of their marquee games. And so the problem is, in a situation like Activision moving the CDL and moving their assets to YouTube, right? Part of that conversation was probably going to be something along the lines of, if you pay for a tier 1 level hosting, right? You pay a low fee. And we will provide you, as a courtesy, the higher fee, the higher tier, maybe a tier 2 or tier 3 service. And then as a result, you end up with um, you end up with a split in in service tiers, right? And so people who are familiar with buying their internet service, right? They oftentimes will have this, they'll see this, right? They'll pay for a certain speed and they can see that exceeded sometimes. I've come across that. I know other people have, especially if you're buying, as part of a bundle, right? They a lot of times will allow more bandwidth to your connection than you are paying for. However, if you all of a sudden say, well, I am going to eventually move to your competitor and I work for your competitor now, you might see your service reduced to exactly what you're paying for, which I feel like matches what we've seen with the server quality in Call of Duty, especially since the switch to YouTube for the CDL. And so I think there's a lot to be said for that. And there's a big concern with that, in the space. So what does that mean for us? What does that mean for development? And what might the future look like? And I think one of the big concerns, is that are we going to, why don't they fix the servers? Why don't we get better servers? And the reality is I think they're stuck in a contract with a competitor to Microsoft. And so they're just, and they're not willing to invest time, money, and effort to optimize, to really optimize both their development side, which moving from their own private servers to a mirrored host setup, which they probably would have started when they initially signed the contract and then backed away from when Microsoft got involved. Now they're stuck with, they have, they're in this contract, they can't get out of it. Google is not going to do them any favors, but they can't move over to Microsoft yet for an unknown amount of time. Contracts like that might be 3 years, so this might be the end of it. It might be 5 years, it might be longer. And so, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Maybe Microsoft can't cut it. Maybe they literally don't have the infrastructure to do it. I don't know. I don't think that's true. I think they're capable of it. But I don't see them, but I see these other stumbling blocks, in the way for us to find out. And then lastly, the development side of it, right? They're probably stuck in a limbo of, for my company, the company I worked at, what we did is we moved our development off of our private servers onto basically the same domain and the same space, right? That we provided the live service from. And it was just like a different configuration of the server, so that we could get an exact clone in the exact environment on the same type of server that we were serving the live product on. And so the benefit for us was that we were able to reduce downtime to almost zero. We had very few problems. It removed a huge chunk of overhead in terms of like trying to test, trying to have multiple products come online, and how to compare how they would work against the real product, the live product. And so a lot of that went away. It used to be a big part of my job was managing that, those sort of issues. And that just went away when we integrated it. It just, if there was a problem, we saw it immediately on testing. And it was much easier to track down, where the problems came from. So if they are running private service for development, where they basically have to clone the live product onto their test environment and then distribute that on their own, it's going to cause problems. And if they are trying to build that out, right, and they want, everybody I think will want to be on the cloud service, on the cloud servers with the live product, so you can test in as close to a live environment as possible. However, again, if Microsoft has plans to move the game over to their servers, which I hope they will, because it should be a better experience for everybody, that they'll move development when they do that. But they're not going to do that if they're under contract with Microsoft, right? Because if they're under contract with Google, because Google and Microsoft are competitors, right? They're not going to do each other favors. So I think this opens my eyes, and hopefully, hopefully this kind of opens your eyes a little bit, where you can kind of see where some of these cracks are coming from, and where some of these problems that we come into, especially with servers, especially with, why aren't we seeing quality improvements? Is simply because now Microsoft stepped in and messed up the plan for Activision and Google to work together. And I think that's really apparent right now. And so hopefully that contract ends soon if it exists, right? And they'll move maybe the next game, or maybe they'll move Verdansk over to Microsoft, and we can start getting away from these Google servers and these problems that we're having. But this article is really telling to me, and I think it's really it's confirming of a lot of things that I suspected. And so I assume again that it is correct, that they are true, that these things are legitimate statements. And that being said, I think it explains a lot about what's going on with Warzone and with Call of Duty in general. So that's what I have for you. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below, and I'll catch you on the next one.